clarification. I know that the tasking is only just beginning, but these battle groups, are they likely to be similar to what we've seen set up in the Baltics and Poland? And as a second point, if I may, is this not the sort of thing that would antagonize Moscow and therefore should be avoided at this critical time? Thank you.
NATO is a defensive alliance. NATO is not a threat to Russia, and we have been clear for years and months that we are ready to sit down and also listen to Russian security concerns and to address issues like, for instance, arms control. If they are concerned about missiles and offensive weapons, the best way to deal with that is to sit down and engage in good faith in talks about how can we reduce the number of missiles. But that has to be balanced and verifiable. We have been able to do that before. It is possible to make agreements with Russia, not least on arms control. We have seen that with the INF Treaty back in the 80s, that actually banned all intermediate range weapons. That was extremely important for European security. Then a few years ago we saw the demise of that treaty, but that was because Russia deployed intermediate range missiles in violation of the INF Treaty. But of course we can go back to a regime where we ban categories of weapons if this is balanced and verifiable. We have proven before that we can limit the number of long-range missiles, and there are strategic talks going on between the United States and Russia. So we are not a threat. We are ready for dialogue, and we have put forward a long list of specific topics where we believe it's possible to find common ground and to address some of those concerns that Russia has raised. And we have no plans in a way to deploy offensive systems in Ukraine. This is what
there you go. That is the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg for the third time today addressing the cameras on the subject of events in Ukraine. Coming up in the next 57.5 minutes for you. Finally, a plan to deal with migrants crossing the Channel. We'll tell you which 3 islands are in the running to host asylum seekers who would be deported within 48 hours of being picked up. So the plan goes. Also, why is an airline, an organisation we entrust the safety of thousands to, indulging in a little light trolling of a GB News presenter? And throughout today's show, the Daily Telegraph columnist and Lord of the Rings nut, Madeline Grant. But first, the headlines with Polly. No bulletin from Polly because of that extended coverage from NATO. So we'll start with our main story today. We have it, finally, a serious plan for dealing with the Channel migration crisis. It comes from one of the country's leading think tanks, which has a track record of coming up with policies that are subsequently taken up by government. The proposal is simple, that any migrant picked up in the Channel should be deported to a British overseas territory within 48 hours. The think tank, its Policy Exchange, it recommends 3 places for processing, and it urges ministers to have the plan in reserve if negotiations with the French fail, as seems pretty likely. Those 3 British overseas territories, where are they? We'll start with the closest geographically, Alderney in the Channel Islands. Its proximity means that migrants could be moved there quickly by boat without ever reaching the UK mainland. Then there's the British sovereign base areas in Cyprus. Migrants could be processed there because the bases, Akrotiri and Deucalion, are not legally restricted to military use. But the third option is the one favoured by Policy Exchange, the island of Ascension. It's 4,000 miles away, and that makes it expensive to reach, but it's got other things going for it. There is no permanent or indigenous population there. The runway can handle large aircraft, and the climate is clement with an average temperature of 22 degrees. Background briefly, last year, 28,000 migrants crossed the Channel in small boats, and the number expected to at least triple this year, though, of course, the Home Office are minded not to keep on giving us the figures. The Director for the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity is Stephen Wolfe, who joins me now. Stephen, really warm welcome to you. Obviously, this is just a plan from a think tank, albeit one that's got a pedigree of offering sound advice to the government that it then acts on. And it's got specifics, not least about locations.
Yes, and it's very important that this particular think tank has come together with this plan. Of course, we've had discussions about this on your show, and our think tank has also put out the ideas that we should be ensuring that those who come across on small boats, and we would argue even those that come on the back of lorries or come by a train, should immediately be removed out of the country and assessed elsewhere. What is important about this particular report is that it's also brought together some of the legal difficulties that we know those who oppose these ideas will challenge. And the first and most important of those is to deal with the Human Rights Act issues, which would try and prevent us from sending those channel migrants across to these particular venues. And I think they're dealing with it very well.
Stephen, in terms of the deterrent effect that's potentially in play here, it's a deterrent because people would know that if they were to make this journey successfully even, that would not mean they could then get lost in a labyrinthine system, which they can, as we've seen over the years, can be gamed and doesn't always work in the way we hope it will. The story today, which I'm sure you've probably read, 12,000 Afghans who are basically left in hotels. The government says we want to disperse you to different parts of the country. They say, actually, no thanks. Once people are in the country, the government stops being the author of its own destiny.
Absolutely, and that is why the Ascension Island is actually the most important of the three destinations. I recognise that Alderney is useful because you can divert the boats from actually touching onto the shore in Dover or Kent, but you'd then have to set up something like the Kent intake unit on Alderney to assess these people. That could be the first starting point, but why it is deterrent, and a serious deterrent being the Ascension Islands, is because it's much further in some ways than some of the places that many of these asylum applicants and migrants will be coming from. It will send a powerful message to them that they can't come into the UK and then disperse, as those 12,000 want to do, but it will also send a message to the people traffickers that their basic sales package, that we will pick you up wherever you want to go and get in very easily. And once you're there, you can stay. You'll get a house, you get the money, you'll get the opportunity to apply for asylum. And then if you're successful, happy days. That has gone. And that is really a very, very powerful message when you're being asked to pay up to 12 or 13,000 pounds to travel from Afghanistan, Syria, Iran or Iraq to get to the UK.
Stephen, a final point. I mean, there's an element here, it strikes me, were this to happen, of short-term pain, long-term gain, because the short-term pain would be there's a sense in which there'd be a political cost. I think that's reasonable to say. There'd be people likening the system to the situation, to the scheme adopted in Australia. There'll also be a financial cost if you're flying people 4,000 miles to the Ascension Island, to Ascension. That's not going to be cheap, nor is the accommodation they have when they get there.
No, but if you look in terms of the costs that the government has spent on a 10-year plan for housing, it's £4.5 billion. And we realised, we provided with information from the government in the very last few weeks that they're spending £4.7 million a day on hotel fees. That's 1.7 billion. There's a sum of 2.7 billion that we're spending just on housing. We believe that that cost is much more significantly reduced by actually taking them to the Essential Islands. So there will be a cost benefit for us if we do that in the long term. And politically, if Boris Johnson finally came up over the hedges and said, I am going to support this, I believe those in the northern seats and the Midland seats that have brought in those Conservative MPs on the back of the idea that Brexit would mean taking back control, they would be solidified. Those areas would finally say, yes, you as a government are listening to our concerns. You're ignoring the kind of woke elite that believe in having mass migration, even if it comes in illegally, and you're actually listening to our concerns. Thank you very much. And I think that will be a political benefit for the Conservative Party.
Well, we'll see if they heed what you say, Stephen. We'll see if they heed what Policy Exchange have to say to them as well.
Thank you.
Stephen Wolfe, very good of you to join us today. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Madeline Grant, Daily Telegraph columnist alongside me, hasn't been writing about this today. I suspect has written about it in the past. Just on that specific point, we've got a Twitter poll, Madeline. It's getting a lot of traction. It's not been up for very long, and we're heading towards 2,000 votes. 70% of people of those three options, Channel Islands, Cyprus, Ascension, 70% plus are saying Ascension, unsurprisingly, furthest place away possible, seems to be the desired choice.
Yeah, and it's one of those issues where, you know, I think that the government does run a risk of, if it listens to the kind of the great and the good, or wealthy people who dominate political conversation, whose lives are unlikely to be affected by large flows of migration, then they mistake. There's always a mistake to listening to these echo chambers and misjudging what the overall feeling of the public is on it.
Well, I mean, normally that would apply to think tanks, wouldn't it? But actually, it seems to me in this instance, the pointy-headed wonks in the think tank are actually perhaps more in tune with what the public think than perhaps the Home Office is.
Well, you need people like Richard Deakins who co-authored this report, who really understand the legal situation, because obviously there will be great backlash to any such scheme, as there already is to any scheme whatsoever to do with asylum. The system has been sort of gerrymandered in some ways, and once you're in, it's very difficult for you to leave. And so I think what Stephen touched on that was so important was the way in which the current system just creates the conditions for the people traffickers' business model to thrive, because all of the incentives are to make that dangerous crossing, because once you do, then you will stay there. And it's all very well wringing our hands about what goes on in the Channel and the absolute tragedies that happen there day in, day out. But if we're not looking at the root causes of that, the pull factors and the system as it currently stands, then we're not going to tackle that problem. It's one of those sort of cruel to be kind issues.
You didn't write about migrants today, but you did write about Ukraine. And just to mark our viewers' cards, I'm going to be talking to the Ukrainian ambassador to London fairly shortly. We just heard from the NATO Secretary-General. We've heard a lot from him recently. What's your take on Ukraine?
Well, I think it's one of those issues where it seems like the international community is now coming to some kind of a consensus. There seem to be edging towards agreement on various things. But the thing that really has stood out over the last couple of months is just that the lack of any kind of unity, and particularly amongst the EU member states. The EU always made these claims to be a kind of global power in the making, and to indeed having kept the peace and prevented World War III. That was one of the arguments that we heard a lot during the referendum. But when it comes to this big, serious military crisis on its doorstep, they've been missing in action. And the thing that really stands out is the utter division amongst individual member states.
And, I read a book not very long ago, John Kampfner's book, Why the Germans Do Things Better. It was the first time I realised that Gerhard Schroeder, former German Chancellor, was in the pocket of Vladimir Putin. And that sense that, I think this crisis has taught us anything, it's the extent to which the Germans are in hock to the Russians now. The situation where they're sending... Their military help to Ukraine consisted of 5,000 helmets. Yeah. We've been sending anti-tank weapons. They wouldn't let our planes fly over their airspace, for heaven's sake. That's divided. Yes, absolutely. And the excuse that is often given for this, which is that Germany doesn't want to be seen to be involved at all militarily, given its history in the 20th century, is utterly risible, because not assisting Ukraine is very much, not helping the underdog. And if Germany should be doing something to atone for, past sins, it would be helping the underdog, not helping Russia. So that excuse just doesn't hold water. OK, we'll come back to that later on. But Madeleine, for now, thanks very much indeed. We've got a lot in common with Canada, haven't we? But for all that we may share the same head of state, the Queen, it's hard to imagine a British Prime Minister taking the steps that have been taken in the past 48 hours or thereabouts by Justin Trudeau to neutralise protests by truckers. Mr Trudeau has invoked powers normally reserved for terrorists, which would allow the Canadian state to freeze the personal bank accounts of protesters. The decision, widely pilloried, the leader of one Central American country not known for its reputation for political tolerance, said the announcement was a display of hypocrisy from a leader given to lecturing other countries about human rights and democracy. Was that Madeleine Grant coughing or guffawing? I suspect it was the latter. Let's turn to the Canadian journalist and podcast host, Andrew Lawton, who's been following this story throughout and offering us some excellent analysis from his vantage position. He's joining us again, as you see. Andrew, welcome. This has really left people gasping, this decision by Trudeau to treat these truckers essentially as terrorists. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association, I imagine not the kind of organisation you always see eye to eye with, have ridiculed what he's done and said it ought not to have been done.
Yes, and I think what's noteworthy here is that a lot of the criticism directed at Justin Trudeau is coming from the political left, from the political right, from academics, from civil libertarians, because of how little information the government has given to justify what is basically a wartime measures act. That's what this so-called Emergencies Act does. And interestingly enough, just about 10 minutes ago, Ottawa police put out a statement that says under the powers given to them by this, they're going to potentially arrest anyone who goes to Ottawa because of the convoy. Now, this could be me because I'm going tomorrow back to Ottawa to cover the convoy, to report on it. But now you have restriction of movement within Canada that's being done again in the same way it would be done if we were in the midst of war, because there are a few hundred trucks parked in front of Parliament Hill. I
mean, as you describe it, Andrew, that has the whiff of martial law about it. I mean, just practically, surely, you'll just flash your press card and the Mounties will wave you through.
Yes, one would hope, but the absence of information, the absence of detail is one of the most dangerous parts of this. You mentioned in your preamble there, Colin, that banks can freeze accounts. This could be interpreted by banks as freezing the account of anyone who so much as donated 10 Canadian dollars to the convoy. It just isn't spelled out in the regulation. So a lot of it is left to discretion. And not only that, but one of the things Trudeau did is exempt the banks from liability. So no one who has their account frozen by the bank has any legal recourse for it. The bank just needs to say they had a suspicion it might have been in some way connected to the convoy.
Andrew, the many and varied hypocrisies of Justin Trudeau have made him almost a figure of fun for many on this side of the Atlantic. But does it really damage him in the polls in Canada?
That's the big question. He has often been very Teflon in that he has not had to deal with the consequences of a great many scandals. He's won elections after each major scandal he's had, but we do see this turning in polls a little bit in the last couple of weeks. The trucker convoy has had tremendous support, and even among people who don't support the convoy, they have no time for Justin Trudeau. His approval rating is about half that of the convoy itself. Now, we don't have a federal election coming up that is scheduled at least, but certainly his handling of this has not been endearing himself even to his supporters.
Andrew Lawton, thanks again. Hope you get through the police lines with your press card. Thanks a lot. Madeleine Grant alongside me still to reflect on this story. It does feel to a lot of people like Trudeau has overplayed his hand. The counter view is if you live in Ottawa, you're sick and tired of a fortnight's protest that's made your life difficult.
Well, yes, but it depends who you blame for the continuation of that protest and what they were objecting to in the first place, which many people would have felt was deeply illiberal to impose those sorts of vaccine mandates on a population. But it strikes me that what this smacks to me of is a sense of desperation, because Trudeau basically used everything in his kind of the liberal playbook could offer him. So when the convoy started, when people got going, he goes, oh, well, they're all racist. They have, wrong opinions. We're dealing with fascists and terrorists. And that didn't work. They carried on. So then he had to revert into more of the fascist playbook and start freezing accounts and doing the most extraordinary powers, that using them in a way that would have been pretty disgraceful, even at a time of, a great emergency scenario.
I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back. Can the camera? I'm patting myself on the back there. I did a monologue a few months ago talking about Insulate Britain and how though it irritated people profoundly that the M25 was being blocked by people, we did it by the book. We did it. The rule of law was maintained. We didn't devolve to powers the likes of which we're seeing brought in by someone like Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
Madeleine, we're going to talk to you about something rather more weighty in a moment. Lord of the Rings coming up after the break. Oh yes, we will look at the new Lord of the Rings Amazon series previewed this week. It's diverse, but is it any good? But first, a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern. Risk of some very severe weather hitting the UK during the next 48 hours as storms Dudley and Eunice arrive. Widespread disruption, with Eunice being the more powerful storm, the risk of dangerous wind speeds by Friday. Wednesday night brings, wind gusts of 70, perhaps even 80 mile per hour to central southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, as Storm Dudley blows through. Widespread gales for northern and central parts of the UK, especially around coast and hills. Then the winds moderate through the rest of the night so that by dawn, It is less severe out there, but still a blustery start to the day. Some sunny spells first thing, but further showers, falling as snow above 200 metres for northern England, much of Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. Those showers continue throughout much of Thursday, gradually easing later. A few more showers arriving into Wales, the southwest, by the afternoon. But away from the showers, there will be some brighter spells and the wind less strong by the afternoon. 10 or 11 in the south, 5 or 6 further north, feeling cold, especially where we've got that brisk wind continuing in the far north northwest. The winds ease on Thursday evening. If you're heading to bed thinking the winds aren't particularly strong on Thursday evening, well, be aware that Eunice is developing rapidly and the winds will really ramp up by the early hours of Friday, with the risk of widespread gales and some dangerous wind speeds by the start of Friday. So initially relatively calm on Thursday evening. Then the rain arrives ahead of Eunice, bumping into cold air, turning to snow across much of northern England, central and southern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well. But the wind is of greatest concern, especially during Friday morning, with the risk widely of 60 to 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts. In places, 80 mile-per-hour wind gusts across central and southern parts of the UK, and around the coasts of Wales and southwest England, the risk of 90 mile-per-hour wind gusts, or even slightly more in some of the more exposed spots. These are dangerous wind speeds, widespread disruption and damage possible, and disruption from snow further north as well.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. It is the most expensive series in TV history. The Lord of the Rings. And the film critic and podcaster Van Connor joins me now to reflect on what we might expect for the $1 billion. Van, what do you think?
I think, to be honest, the deck is kind of stacked against this one as far as fantasy shows on television go. Because in the last decade, we've really only had Game of Thrones and then to an extent The Witcher that have really caught on. And they've taken attempts. There are things like The Wheel of Time. That was only 4 or 5 months ago, though you couldn't move for billboards and advertisements of it. But nobody watched the thing. And chucking money at these things doesn't always seem to guarantee quality, especially not when it comes to fantasy.
Well, how do you work your way through $1 billion if so much of it actually is generated through CGI?
Well, people have this sort of misapprehension that computer effects are cheap. Visual effects, they're like anything, you get what you pay for. And in terms of the level of computer-generated imagery that would be required for a production like this, what you'll find is as you can imagine, it's no mean feat. It's quite the challenge. Getting the Peter Jackson trilogy off the ground, that took a long time. Taking The Hobbit off the ground took even longer. They were trying to start The Hobbit from the second The Lord of the Rings finished. It still took the better part of a decade to reach screens. In the case of this one, they had certain requirements they had to fulfill for the Tolkien estate. One was that the production had to go into production within 2 years. They had to commit to at least 5 seasons, and they had to commit to spending a set amount. And that amount has led to the sum total of a 5-season-long show costing $1 billion. To put that in comparison for you, 8 seasons of Game of Thrones didn't cost $800 million.
Wow, that does set the context beautifully. Van Connor, really nice to talk to you. Thanks a lot. Madeline Grant, self-styled Lord of the Rings aficionado, a member of the community, I think.
No, absolutely not. No, I'm a fair weather fan compared to the community.
OK,
sure.
but you did go to the same school as J.R. Tolkien.
I did, yes. He went to the school just opposite mine, and it was in Birmingham, and there's a lot of places that he depicts in the series that are thought to be based on parts of Birmingham.
What do you make of this trailer?
Well, I mean, it was very short, so there's not a great deal to go on. But my instinct is, firstly, it looked I could really feel the stamp of Hollywood on it, which is bad if you're dealing with Tolkien, I think, because the aesthetic was more Game of Thrones. But, I mean, Tolkien's big thing was that he was rooted in British history and specifically kind of Anglo-Saxon culture. He was a professor of Anglo-Saxon Old English. So for anything to be looking too modern or too Hollywood is automatically bad. My favourite example of this in the books is that his the name Bag End is actually a joke about he hated any he loved the English language and he hated any foreign influences coming into the language, and he particularly hated the phrase cul-de-sac, which was just becoming popular in the 40s and 50s, I think, when he was writing. And so Bag End is a joke because cul-de-sac means bag end, if that makes sense, in French. So Bag End is the English. It was a joke about how much he hated any foreign influence. So for things to be too Hollywood is automatically a bit of a red flag.
Madeline, you can come again. That's educational as well as interesting. Thanks very much. After the break, Ryanair's odd attack on Twitter. GB News' Calvin Robinson will be talking about that. We will debate, should corporations really do politics? But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Just after 4:30, the headlines this hour. NATO has tasked its commanders to work out details for a deployment of battle groups to Eastern Europe in response to Russia's military build-up on Ukraine's borders. Its Secretary-General confirmed the alliance has seen no signals of withdrawal of Russian troops or equipment from the Ukrainian border. Jens Stoltenberg was speaking at a news conference in Brussels during the defence ministers' meeting.
Today, ministers decided to develop options for further strengthen NATO's deterrence and defence, including to consider establishing new NATO battle groups in Central and Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Our military commanders will now work on the details and report back within weeks.
Jens Stoltenberg. Well, in other news, Prince Andrew is facing renewed calls to give up one of his last remaining major titles, the Duke of York, after agreeing to settle the civil sex assault claim brought against him by Virginia Giuffre in the United States. The royal has already been stripped of his honorary military roles and his title, His Royal Highness. Prince Andrew says he regrets his association with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and has agreed to make a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity. Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales's charity foundation is being investigated by the Metropolitan Police over allegations of cash for honours. In a statement, they said it relates to media reports claiming offers of help were made to secure honours and citizenship for a Saudi national. Prince Charles's team have stated publicly he was not aware of any links between donations to the foundation and any honours. Police searching for a sex offender who escaped from an open prison 3 days ago have released a new image of him. It shows Paul Robson without a distinctive braided beard. He was sentenced to life for attempted rape and indecent assault in Lincolnshire. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. We'll have more from Brazier after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Go woke, go broke, so the saying, fairly new saying goes. But that does not stop businesses from doing it. Nobody elected them, but firms do keep on feeling the need to insert their corporate brands into the public square of debate. The latest intervention came from the less than luxury airline Ryanair, which tweeted thus: we're not an airline, but we do fly planes. Hashtag Djokovic. It was, as you can see from, if you are watching on TV, not listening on radio, it was a retweet of a post by the BBC following their scoop, their interview with the world's #1 tennis player, Novak Djokovic, in which he suggested to Amal Rajan of the BBC that he wasn't anti-vax, but was willing to sacrifice trophies if compelled to have a COVID jab. Well, I'll leave you to decide whether the tweet was especially funny, but it seemed a fairly clunky attempt to ridicule those who have, in their eyes at least, taken a stand against mandatory vaccinations. It's not an isolated incident, we can say that with conviction. Ben & Jerry's, recently, makers of ice cream, took aim at the geopolitical wisdom of war in Ukraine. If you want to go a little bit further back, 2020, several companies then aligned themselves with Black Lives Matter. Yorkshire Tea, for instance, urged critics of BLM not to use their tea bags, which was ultimately about as much use as a chocolate teapot, wasn't it? Let's reflect on this in the company of our guests. Today, we've got Angelica Malin, who's with me here in the studio. And we've also got the man in question, Calvin Robinson, who was on the end, Calvin, if you don't mind me saying, of some fairly ad hominem tweets, which, for me, and this is just my opinion, really jarred. This is an airline. It should be a trusted institution. It carries thousands of people aloft every day and keeps them safe. That's the intention. It shouldn't be getting involved in a little light trolling of you.
No, it's very strange. I've been trolled by many people, including Hollywood celebrities, all kinds of figures on the internet, but never a company before. All I did was point out that I didn't think their tweet was particularly funny. It seemed to be attacking Novak and people like him who choose not to take the vaccine. And I don't think that it's the place of an airline to say that. And then they quote tweeted me with their 500,000 followers and tried to attack the quality of my broadcasting, which I think is outrageous. It's sixth form level politics. But the problem here is that they were discriminating against a large portion of their customer base. I took a Ryanair flight on Friday, just gone, that recently. I will never fly with them again. I'm sure there are many people who saw this Twitter conversation that thought, actually, I don't want to be lectured to by a commercial airline. It's not their place to talk politics to me. I will not fly with them again. And this is where the saying "go woke, go broke" comes from, isn't it? Because we have to vote with our wallets. Do we want a company that is producing a high quality good and service for us, or do we want a company that will lecture to us about social justice from their political persuasion? I don't want the latter. I'd rather have the former.
Angelica, Calvin makes the point that this is something that's been said. There are customers involved. Actually, the other people, it seems to me, as part of the democratic process that have been completely eclipsed in this equation, where we're talking about Ryanair, are the people who work for Ryanair. Is this a democratic exercise where Ryanair are speaking for every single person who works for them, the baggage handlers, the security guys, the cleaners who clean the loos in Michael O'Leary's office? That would be a democratic exercise. If you're entering into a public political debate, you need to have a democratic mandate for saying something controversial, don't you?
I don't think you need a mandate. They're not a government, so no. And I think Ryanair is known for being kind of controversial in their social media. I don't think it's that big a deal, to be honest. I think we expect a slightly light, playful tone for them. They obviously know their demographic and they think it's something that will go down well with their audience.
Calvin, they wouldn't do it if it didn't make commercial sense. That's what Angelica's saying.
I'll tell you why I think it is a big deal, because it's the issue that they've chosen, the bandwagon they've chosen to jump on. So we're talking about a case of bodily autonomy. We're talking about vaccine mandates. We're talking about people having the right to choose what medication they put into their body or not. And this is the conversation that Novak Djokovic got involved in. And this is the conversation that Ryanair has jumped on and essentially discriminated against. Now, Djokovic said it's his decision to make over his body, and that is more important to him than the title or anything else. I think that's a very noble stance to make. He's potentially giving up great wins and successes to make a principled stance, and I think that's admirable. Now, for someone to come down, or a company to come down and say, no, that's wrong, and actually we think you're making a mistake, and that's not talking to him, that's talking to a whole swathe of people who've also made this decision to actually choose what goes into their body or not. Or even if they haven't, even if people have been vaccinated, they can still believe in the personal choice of bodily autonomy. And we saw, Colin mentioned Ben & Jerry's in the lead up to this conversation. We've seen companies like this throughout. Ben & Jerry's in particular criticised Priti Patel for not wanting to, for wanting to clamp down on illegal immigration. Now, again, that's a thing that I think most people in this country at the moment would be in favour of, clamping down on illegal immigration. Now, for a company to come out and against a popular decision isn't them knowing their audience, I don't think. It's them wanting to have a bit of banter in the case of Ryanair, or wanting to be political in the case of Ben & Jerry's, and making a mistake.
A mistake. Angelica, you don't think it is a mistake, but I just wonder, where you sit right now. We've had a NHS doctor who declined to have a jab. No, not a headbanger. And part of what I would suggest, and I don't, I'm jabbed, but part I would suggest of a substantial minority of thoughtful, reasonable people who just don't think actually that mandatory jabs are a particularly good idea. So this is a marginal discussion. It's not something where 99% of people think it's a terrible idea. That would make more sense if right now we're getting onto it. It's something that is moot.
I think companies should be encouraging people to get the vaccine. So I personally don't have an issue with Ryanair sharing something like that. I do actually think there's a responsibility. Where you stand on the vaccine is where you'll stand on issues like this. For me personally, and again, we're talking about a younger demographic that Ryanair as a low-cost airline will appeal to. I don't see there being an issue them encouraging people to get the vaccine. I understand your point about autonomy, but they do have an audience that want to listen to them, and they have just made a decision. They're not a government, they're a company, and they're allowed to have a political stance on things. I don't think there's a problem with that.
Angelica, just on Calvin's point, he was expanding it out to other companies as well. Do you see no distinctions? Does it not matter what the company is, whether they're flogging you airline seats or whether they're flogging you ice cream? There should be no subject off limits. We can talk about whether it's vaccines that are compulsory or whether it's Ukraine. Doesn't matter. Companies have a right to speak on any subject. Is that what we're saying?
I think companies do have a right to speak on topics, and I think that's also come out of an expectation with the customer. Customers are actually expecting brands to be more political now. You talk about woke as if it's a negative thing, but we're also talking about customers who are socially and politically aware and informed, and they want and connect with businesses that are also the same. So I don't have an issue with brands weighing in on political matters. I think we actually expect it quite a lot of the time now.
Well, the more it it happens, the more people get to come to expect it, I suppose. Calvin, just reflect on this point, if you would, the point I'm making about there being a democratic deficit here. It just seems to me, I think it will seem to a lot of our viewers, that you're getting companies, I mean, I mentioned Yorkshire Tea. I don't know how they arrived at the decision to support Black Lives Matter. Maybe they're, lowly paid people working for Yorkshire Tea were beating a path to the marketing department's door and saying, you must do something to support Black Lives Matter. I don't suspect that's how it really happened. I suspect it was a small gaggle of highly networked, highly credentialed, highly paid executives who took it upon themselves to decide that was the corporate direction they wanted to go in. It was nothing about democracy.
Of course, it's the Metropolitan liberal elite once again lecturing to us plebs on how to think and how to live our lives and what to put in our bodies. And I've actually had DMs from pilots and air stewardesses who have said, these people on Twitter do not represent me. I don't think it's appropriate for them to be political in this way. I think the only reason Angelica agrees with them is because they fall in line with her politics. A company has a duty to their shareholders and to their customers. That is it. It's as simple as that. They don't have a duty to be political in this way. And companies like Ryanair in particular, they've won, 6 years in a row they won Worst Airline. They were awarded that booby prize because they're a terrible customer, a terrible company. So if they focused on customer service, improving their service, improving their products, maybe we would be in a better place. But instead, they're focusing on lecturing people like me who choose to make decisions based on our own risk analysis rather than being lectured to by the higher-ups, the metropolitan liberal elites. I think it's disgusting, it's inappropriate, it's not their place, and they should pipe down.
But they did want publicity, and they have achieved it because we're debating it on air, so it got what they wanted from it.
Angelica, just on I'll let you answer the point that Calvin made there, that actually you're agreeing with Ryanair because you agree with their politics. And actually, if they were saying something that you found discordant, if they were saying something that was perhaps a little more less progressive and more transgressive or more traditionalistic, maybe you'd be less comfortable with it.
Well, I think my politics on this issue around the vaccine is a popular view. So there isn't an element where you're right. I mean, OK, you're not agreeing with me, but the majority of people are pro-vaccine, I believe.
Calvin? Believe, based on what? Do you have any data to back that up? That's quite a statement to make. And this is not about being pro-vaccine or not pro-vaccine. This is about being about vaccine mandates. It's about forcing people to put things into their body. It's about personal autonomy. It's about my body, my choice. The people who paint this as a pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine are actually being very disingenuous. I think it's inappropriate for you to do that because most people do believe that vaccines are important. Most people believe in medication. But also, I think that most people would be against you forcing me to put something in my body.
I'm not forcing you.
So that's the policy that we're discussing here, darling.
OK, no, we're not doing darling. We're not doing darling, unless you're addressing that to me, Calvin, which you might have been. We're on very good terms. Calvin, just on the point that what really shocked me about the whole thing was the way they got into the back and forth. It was one thing making a calculated decision to sit there and say, OK, there's the BBC tweet. There's Djokovic. We think he's made a bit of a fool of himself. That's a considered decision. But what then subsequently unfolded was somebody presumably on their laptop, I'm guessing it was an individual not done by committee, banging out the tweets, getting involved in a Twitter row with you, which just seems a really odd way to run the marketing of a big company.
Let's be honest, it's unprofessional, isn't it? I assumed it's some, intern who's thinking he's being funny, having a bit of banter online and got a bit too far. That's what I'm assuming. It could be directly from Michael O'Leary because he has form on being political in this case, if we look at what he's done in the situation in Ireland. So maybe it is the company policy to come down on these issues quite hard. But I don't think it's a good business model because they're turning people off.
Angelica Malin, last word to you.
Well, I mean, you came in insulting them in the starting point. There must have been a part of you that expected them to come back with something a little bit spicy as well. And Ryanair is known for these kind of things. It's a publicity stunt at the end of the day, and it's worked. So, we do expect brands, I think, sometimes to be a bit controversial, to be personal on social media. So I'm not surprised that this happened. And, you can't constantly fire out insults to businesses and think that they're not going to respond at all.
Calvin, we've got to leave it there. Angelica Malin, Calvin Robinson, thanks both very much indeed. After the break, we'll take a pause. Inflation hits a 30-year high, 5.5% as prices rise. Liam Halligan will be joining us to crunch the numbers and reflect on how true they are. But first, here's a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern. Risk of some very severe weather hitting the UK during the next 48 hours as storms Dudley and Eunice arrive. Widespread disruption with Eunice being the more powerful storm, the risk of dangerous wind speeds by Friday. Wednesday night brings, wind gusts of 70, perhaps even 80 mile per hour to central southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern England, as Storm Dudley blows through. Widespread gales for northern and central parts of the UK, especially around coast and hills. Then the winds moderate through the rest of the night so that by dawn, it is less severe out there, but still a blustery start to the day. Some sunny spells first thing, but further showers, falling as snow above 200 metres for northern England, much of Scotland, Northern Ireland as well. Those showers continue throughout much of Thursday, gradually easing later. A few more showers arriving into Wales, the southwest, by the afternoon. But away from the showers, there will be some brighter spells and the wind less strong by the afternoon. 10 or 11 in the south, 5 or 6 further north, feeling cold, especially where we've got that brisk wind continuing in the far north, northwest. The winds ease on Thursday evening. If you're heading to bed thinking the winds aren't particularly strong on Thursday evening, well, be aware that Eunice is developing rapidly and the winds will really ramp up by the early hours of Friday, with the risk of widespread gales and some dangerous wind speeds by the start of Friday. So initially relatively calm on Thursday evening. Then the rain arrives ahead of Eunice, bumping into cold air, turning to snow across much of northern England, central and southern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well. But the wind is of greatest concern, especially during Friday morning, with the risk widely of 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts. In places, 80 mile per hour wind gusts across central and southern parts of the UK, and around the coasts of Wales and southwest England, the risk of 90 mile per hour wind gusts, or even slightly more in some of the more exposed spots. These are dangerous wind speeds, widespread disruption and damage possible, and disruption from snow further north as well.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The Office for National Statistics reporting that inflation hit 5.5% in January, 7% it's scheduled to, well, we think it's going to reach later this year. Eye-watering. But does it reflect the actual cost of living right now, which some think is far, far higher? One of those people, our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's here in the studio. How high, Liam?
Well, Colin, we focus on this thing called the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. But in life, if the train fares go up, if you live in a council house and your rent goes up, if you're a student loan and the charges for that go up, it's all linked to something called the Retail Price Index, the RPI, which also includes housing costs. That's at 7.8%. And the way I look at it is this: if a lot of what you spend is on necessities like fuel and food, then your real lived inflation rate is much higher. Look, the price of a litre of petrol, January 2021 to 2022, that's what the inflation is meant to measure, that's up by 25%, from £1.16 to £1.45. Domestic fuel bills, they're up by 20 or 30%. So the basket of goods that the ONS uses is very honestly calibrated, but I think it reflects a group of people in the middle. But of course, lots of people don't live in the middle. Yeah. So for poorer people, lower income households, more vulnerable households, this is the point that isn't made enough in our politics. The real lived rate of inflation is much higher than the CPI at 5.5%. It's higher even than the RPI at 7.8%. I'd say for a lot of our not particularly poor, but previously comfortable, now struggling households, it's in double digits.
Those struggling families.
Yeah.
Madeline Grant, still alongside Liam, has been with me for the last hour, will be with me, we hope, for the next hour. One side effect of inflation running this rampant is that people do start belt tightening. There almost becomes that, there's a thrifty outlook suddenly. Yeah. And people cut back on certain things, don't they? They look at things, can I afford Sky? Can I afford my paper bill? I mean,
yeah.
that your bosses at the Telegraph will be worried, won't they?
I'm sure they will, and I'm sure that every business up and down the country that deals in anything that is not an essential that could be cut will be very worried. Restaurants, pubs that already had a really terrible time when you think about the level of uncertainty they've been dealing with for the last few years, any kind of hospitality venue, just having got through that absolute morass, and now to find themselves in this situation where a lot of people are being priced out through high inflation. And added to Liam's excellent points about why it is so high, we also, before any of this started, we had some of the highest house prices, highest rental prices. Yeah. So there's all these massive drains on people's resources.
Liam, do you mind if we just change tack a little bit and go back to the future? We were
I'm
just
flexible.
we were just talking about why corporations are getting involved in Twitter spats. The case of Ryanair. Madeline's probably got a view on this as well. What on earth are they up to? Why? I don't know how true it is that go woke, go broke. Maybe it's wishful thinking on the part of some. But why are big grown-up companies like Ryanair getting involved in Twitter spats with people like Calvin Robinson?
Well, there is a generational divide. You've got a load of kids, I've got kids. Sometimes there's a kind of one generation's from Mars and one generation's from Venus kind of thing. But I think it also reflects the fact that a lot of the big companies, to do their social media, they're going to employ people who've got a track record of social media, and those people are generally going to be between 20 and 30, aren't they?
But you're giving them a lot of latitude, aren't you?
Indeed. I think a lot of the big bosses in these companies, they don't really know what's going on when it comes to social media. They don't understand the impact of it. And then when an explosion does happen, they don't want to be seen as the bad guy who imposes a more grown-up point of view. I think a lot of our generation, Colin, we're treading on eggshells around certain issues. We don't want to be seen to be dinosaurs or out of touch. And yet a lot of the spending power is among people of our generation. So that's the disconnect between what goes down well with your kids and what actually goes down well in terms of the balance sheet of the business.
I'm afraid, Madeline, you are the millennial filling in the old boy sandwich on this one. I mean, do you recognise that depiction?
I think perhaps that's true. Definitely the point about social media accounts. And there have been some high-profile cases. I think it was the Co-op where they tweeted out something very, very foolish, and then it created a backlash, and then they said that they hadn't meant to tweet it. So people, it's not always a good idea if companies start sort of divesting from you as a result. But, I mean, what I find I don't know why anyone would want to live in this world where everything is politicised, where you have your ice cream is telling you about Palestine and you have your airline, telling you what to think about vaccines. Can't they just be an airline and ice cream? It's a sort of symptom of the way in which our culture feels a lot angrier, and politics seems to have infested everything. And even if it's a generational trope, I just think it's one that we should try and do away with.
And you made a really important point, if I may, Colin, on social media just a couple of days ago. You said we seem to have lost the art of disagreeing gracefully with somebody and not wanting them sacked or cancelled because we disagree. As we said when we launched GB News, we've got to learn to disagree properly with each other. That is the art of debate and ultimately, in my view, democracy.
Agree with a lot of that, but I'm afraid I've still got to cut you off because it's 5 o'clock. Thanks very much indeed.
Old codger.
Welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5 for you, have they got their priorities right? Why is Railtrack employing a diversity officer on more money than the Prime Minister gets when it could be focusing on the rail timetable? Also, the Christian parents whose 6-year-old has been told he'll be considered transphobic if he finds the sight of a boy wearing a dress confusing. The parents will join me. Also, alongside me throughout the hour, the Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant, representative of a younger generation today. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon. Your top stories. Some breaking news. From April, children between the ages of 5 and 11 in England will be offered a COVID-19 vaccination. The Health Secretary Sajid Javid made the decision following guidance from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. Previously, only at-risk youngsters in that age group were able to have the jab. In Northern Ireland, Stormont's health minister also confirmed they'll accept the advice, but didn't say when it would be implemented. Wales and Scotland have already announced the expansion of their campaigns. In other news, NATO has tasked its commanders to work out details for a deployment of battle groups to Eastern Europe. It's in response to Russia's military build-up on the Ukrainian border. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg confirmed the alliance has seen no signs that support Russia's claims that it is pulling back its troops.
So far, we do not see any sign of de-escalation on the ground. No withdrawals of troops or equipment. This may, of course, change. However, what we see today is that Russia maintains a massive invasion force ready to attack.
Jens Stoltenberg. Well, Russia says it will retaliate if Britain imposes new economic sanctions against Moscow over the Ukraine crisis. Russia's finance minister is warning that its energy supplies would be rerouted if penalties are imposed, which could result in further increases in energy prices. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the UK government needs to take a tougher stance.
I do want to see the government going further in relation to sanctions. I don't think they've used the powers that they've already got as much as they should have done, and I don't think they've looked closely enough at their own donations. And I think any donations to the Conservative Party that have any link to Putin should be looked at very, very carefully. And I want to see further sanctions put in place as quickly as possible.
It's Keir Starmer. The energy regulator Ofgem is bringing in new rules requiring suppliers to offer existing customers the same deals as new ones. It'll end the practice of cut-price deals being subsidised by existing customers on higher rates. It follows the announcement that the energy price cap will rise by 54% in April. Ofgem says they'll monitor how effective the measure is before considering whether to make it permanent. Police searching for a sex offender who escaped from an open prison in Lincolnshire 3 days ago have released a new image of him. It shows Paul Robson without his distinctive beard. Officers are also saying his facial hair could be lighter in colour. The 56-year-old, described as a particular danger to women and children, was sentenced to life for attempted rape and indecent assault. The Prince of Wales's charity is being investigated by the Metropolitan Police over allegations of cash for honours. In a statement, the Met said the investigation relates to media reports of claiming offers of help were made to secure honours and citizenship for a Saudi national. Police officers have been liaising with the Prince of Wales's charity, the foundation, as part of their initial investigations. Prince Charles's team have stated publicly that His Royal Highness was not aware of any links between donations to the foundation and honours. Prince Andrew is facing renewed calls to give up one of his last remaining major titles, the Duke of York, after agreeing to settle the civil sex assault claim brought against him in the United States by Virginia Giuffre. The Prince has already been stripped of his honorary patronages, as well as his title, the Royal Highness. Prince Andrew says he regrets his association now with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and has agreed to make a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity. And as you may have seen, the Met Office is warning 90-mile-an-hour winds brought by Storm Dudley could pose a danger to life today. Amber weather warnings are in place across central and southern Scotland and the north of England. ScotRail wound down almost all of its services from 4 o'clock this afternoon amid fears of falling trees and blowing debris. From land to air, well, very much higher. In fact, astronomers have discovered a massive black hole, a supermassive black hole, hiding in a ring of cosmic dust. They've released an artist impression of images taken by the European Southern Observatory's new Very Large Telescope. Scientists say it's helped give them new insights into the history of our very own Milky Way. You're with GB News. We'll have more news as it happens. Now back to Colin Brazier.
This can be a busy slot for breaking news. We've got some more for you. You just heard it talked of there in the bulletin. It's just been announced that COVID vaccines are to be offered to all children aged 5 to 11 in England. Health and Social Care Secretary, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, said he was following the advice of the Independent Joint Committee on Vaccination and immunisation. Well, that follows the announcement from Wales, the Welsh Government, their policy last night, and the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon following suit this morning. I think they said it was from the age of 4. Somebody can clarify that for me, I'm sure. Let's turn to our regular NHS doctor and contributor, Dr. Veena Babu, who can ponder on this one for us, perhaps on behalf of those parents wondering whether it's entirely safe, Doctor, for their children to be jabbed. What say you?
Hi, Colin. Thanks for having me again. I'm actually quite surprised by this, but, you know, on one hand, if we look at it, if Scotland and Wales have taken the advice on, the JCVI are very thorough. And if we look back to when they had recommended the vaccination for pregnant and breastfeeding women, we had only offered it to everyone, right? We said the same thing. No one's going to be forcing anyone to take the vaccination. I would still, you know, as a GP, I would still recommend all parents to do your own research, read around the topic, look at the sources, and once you feel confident, only then put your child forward to get the vaccination, because there wouldn't be any instance where anyone will force you or kind of impose that on you. I just want to make sure that parents can, you know, be at ease with that.
And you will doubt, you know, you'll get a range of opinions expressed before you, I'm sure, in the doctor's surgery, Veena, and you'll get some people saying, well, look, I don't want to, you know, my child's bodily autonomy, they're not old enough to understand the issues. I'm not going to make the decision on their part. They need to make it themselves. They're too young to make that decision. You'll get other people saying, well, actually, if kids get it, they spread it, that improves at a rapid pace herd immunity, if you can still use that phrase, herd immunity, amongst young people. To some degree, that's what we've seen recently amongst the young with Omicron. So you're going to be facing a lot of these observations from your patients and their children, aren't you?
In essence, it's the two things, right? One of them is to reduce exposure for them and reduce the complications for them. But the good news is we've not had a lot of children with adverse outcomes with COVID-19. The second one would be to reduce infectivity rates to their adults or grandparents or elders, you know, as they go to school. So that would be the long term. And of course, they are children, you know, the 5 to 11-year-olds, they will grow up as well. So on one hand, you could look at it as getting the vaccination can help build their immune systems for when they grow up, so they'll have a better chance of fighting the vaccination. But I still think more data needs to be collected before we can confidently say and recommend this to everybody.
Veena, really good of you to join us. I know it's at a slightly different time from the one we planned to, but thanks for your time as ever. Dr. Veena Babu joining me there. Madeline Grant alongside me here in the studio with opinions on jabbing the over 5s.
Well, I think your doctor put it very well, which is that as long as
she's not my doctor.
Well, the channel's in-house doctor. She seems like a great doctor. I think I'd love to have her as my doctor. But she put it very well when she said that, you know, as long as no one's being coerced, I think that's so important. That element of choice that families and parents should be able to look at. Firstly, their kids' circumstances, but also what works for them and their family. And I'm so pleased that, in general, this country has avoided some of the excesses that we've seen in other parts of the world. And, you know, the JCVI has been generally quite careful about these things and slow to recommend things. Some people have complained at times that they have not been forthcoming with the recommendations they should have done. So I guess I'm fairly relaxed as long as it's no one's forced to, and there's no schools where they're, you know, quietly enforcing it or encouraging children to do it.
The government will be encouraged by recent data. It's been sufficiently encouraged to talk, as Boris Johnson did, I think it was last week, about lifting all restrictions a month earlier than was planned, perhaps at the end of this month. So they're beginning quietly to park COVID, God willing, as a problem. Immigration, channel crossings, migrants coming in small boats, that persists in being a serious problem. We're running a poll right now about this idea, floated this morning, I think it was on the front page of the Times, saying, from Policy Exchange, a think tank that's trusted by government, saying you need to deport people within 48 hours of them being picked up in the Channel, and you send them to either Ascension, 4,000 miles away, middle of the Atlantic, the other end of the Mediterranean, Cyprus, the British bases there, or much closer to home, the Channel Islands, namely Alderney. In excess of 4,000 people have voted on this already. 3/4 of them think that it ought to be Ascension as far away as possible. Seems to be the logic behind that, I guess.
Yes, I mean, the story was, I think that was the conclusion that Policy Exchange came to as well, for those reasons, and also for reasons of practicality, that they have already an aircraft, and there's also no population. I think it's military based, but there's no
indigenous population. And there's a very long runway.
Exactly.
Well, a usable.
Exactly. So it has a lot going for it. It was an interesting proposal because Policy Exchange has had a real track record of they propose something and it gets taken up by government. And this is an area where I feel that the issue generally has been ignored for a long time. It was ignored by the mainstream media for a long time, and politicians have. There's a lot of hand-wringing on all sides, but very little in the way of practical solutions. And it's very, very difficult, but it's one of those ones where I think you do have to look at the incentives at play, what is encouraging people to make these journeys and try to deal with that. And the Policy Exchange idea very much does deal with the incentives.
What do you make of what we're hearing from the Home Office that they're no longer going to publish the daily statistics because pesky journalists like us tend to hold them up and say, what are you doing about this?
Well, I wonder if it might be one of those, it's like that Barbara Streisand case where I think she sued someone for taking pictures of her or something. And then as a result, everyone wanted the pictures more than they ever did before because of the amount. I wonder if not talking about it, the having something to hide element means that we will now be talking about it more because it looks like there's a kind of cover-up going on.
Yeah, is it a cover-up? We don't know.
Well, not cover-up, but you know what I mean, the government trying to sort of mark their own homework.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Madeleine, back to you very soon. I know you've written today in The Telegraph about Ukraine, and that's where we turn now. This week, perhaps, you saw a picture of a 79-year-old Ukrainian grandmother in the papers, pointing a gun and promising to fight against a Russian invasion. Well, according to my next guest, what you probably didn't know was that she was training with the so-called Azov Battalion, a paramilitary unit known for its neo-Nazi affiliations. The point he's making is that your enemy's enemy need not always be your friend. Well, I'm joined by the author of that piece, Sohrab Ahmari, the author and contributed editor of the American Conservative magazine. Sohrab, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time. It's very easy when you're sitting here in London to get absorbed by a prevailing narrative, which is quite black and white, really. Moscow bad, Kiev good. Life in its complications is always more complicated than that.
Yeah, absolutely. This story appeared above the fold on the front page of the Times on Monday. This picture of this 79-year-old Ukrainian granny saying, I will die, I will fight to protect my homeland, I will fight to protect my children and my city. Similar images from the same exercise, a civilian training exercise, appeared very prominently covers of the Guardian, the Financial Times, the Independent, all the UK papers, and then here in the United States, where I'm based, it was covered by ABC. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel spoke to the grandmother, who told him, your mother would do the same thing. And of course, it's a very media-ready set of images, right? You have this steely-eyed, silver-haired grandmother, looking down the barrel of a gun at Vladimir Putin. What they didn't mention, the only mention of this was in ABC, but it was only in passing, was the fact that that training exercise was held by something called the Special Detachment Regiment Azov, or more popularly known as the Azov Battalion, which our Federal Bureau of Investigation, our FBI, describes as a group with Nazi ideology, Nazi symbolism. In fact, it's insignia. Their insignia is an SS-inspired insignia. Now, I'm not, to be clear, suggesting that all the Ukrainians getting ready to potentially defend their country against the Russian incursion are Nazis or white supremacists. That's not the point. It's just the fact that our media is so hungry, especially Anglo-American media, is so hungry for these simplistic narratives. Grandmas and attractive young women and children gearing up to defend their country against Russian revanchism, against Russian aggression. And it's never quite so simple as you said. And so all I'm asking for, I think, and I think what people on both sides of the Atlantic in Britain and the United States should ask for, is not this kind of airbrushed, narrative-driven news, just complexity, the world in all its complexity.
Yeah,
it's not to condemn all Ukraine as Nazi.
No, amen to that. I mean, I was there in Kiev in 2014. I remember being struck by some of the shady characters on the Maidan Square, and even in the hotel where we were staying, which was a big hotel, and there were people in guns, hoods with guns in the foyer. They'd taken over the place. It was a really lawless, anarchic time, but it was characterised by the fact that there were people there who were, there was revolution fermenting all around you. Some were from the left, some were from the right, but depicting it as just one was daft. I mean, as you say, it's more complicated than that. Why have we got to that position, Sohrab? Why are we less able to reflect the true diversity of a story back at people? Are we part of the problem? Is what's been seen as sort of news channels, news outlets that take a certain position? That's an allegation sometimes laid against us. You'll be familiar with the argument in the States. Are we part of the problem?
Yeah, I do think there is this clubby mentality among the mainstream media. I used to work for the Wall Street Journal in London for the European edition, and I remember this was a very instructive moment for me. I remember when the migrant crisis happened, the European migrant crisis, 2015, 2016, and I went to cover it. I went and lived in a safe house of the migrants because I speak Persian in Istanbul. There were mainly Afghan migrants. I followed them through the Greek Isles and through the Balkans. And the more time I spent with them, the more it shattered my impressions of it shattered what the rest of the media was saying about this incident. Every person I would speak to would say, I'm an engineer. What did you do in Syria? Well, I'm an engineering student. I always joke, if Syria had this engineering students, it wouldn't be Syria.
I've absolutely got to stop you. We are of one mind on this. I found the experience exactly the same, and it turned out to be a totally seminal experience for me as well. I grew really tired of my colleagues in mainstream media only interviewing the woman uncovered hair with a degree in biomedicine from Damascus University. Sure, they existed. But they weren't every other person. And all the while, because actually the camera, particularly when it's live, never lies. And in the distance, the middle distance, you would see the shadier characters who didn't want to talk to you, couldn't speak English. Why were they there? I mean, I'm not saying, many of them were there to do what I'd be doing, improve the quality of their life, seek economic opportunity. Some of them may have been fresh out of prison. Some of them may have been radical Islamists. We didn't know. It was complicated. There were several different stories, but we got just the one.
Yep, exactly right. So there have been too many instances of this kind, and they've made me especially alert to, let's say, elite consensus. Going back maybe to the Iraq War. Remember, the Iraq War wasn't just something that was concocted by the Bush administration. It had wide support from The Economist, from Fareed Zakaria, these kind of very mainstream left of center figures, from The Atlantic, from The New Yorker. Everyone suddenly was gearing up. The Arab Spring, the reception of the Arab Spring as just this unmitigated good, young Democrats toppling crusty old autocracies. Well, of course, it created these vast ungoverned spaces across the Middle East and North Africa. And then COVID, oh my goodness, all the sort of monomania, the monolithic coverage of how we treat COVID, even as the narrative changes, and it seems like yesterday's orthodoxy is today's heterodoxy. Today's orthodoxy then is enforced against everyone who held to the earlier view or what have you. We have to be willing to call these things out, you and I as journalists and others, hopefully, because we can't just stumble into these kinds of mindless coverage. And Ukraine and Russia is another example unfolding before our eyes.
Soraba Murray, so good to talk to you. And we make a study of all the people's studios, from home studios that we particularly enjoy. And your little solar, I think it's a solar system representation over your shoulder there, is a particularly attractive one.
I'm at a friend's house. This is his kids' room.
Well, we salute them. Thanks very much indeed. Soraba Murray joining us there. Madeline Grant's listening to all that Tuvas going on like that. What do you make of it?
Oh, completely agree. I mean, I haven't been...
We need people to disagree more.
Yeah, I know. One reason I think it has got a lot worse recently is actually social media, which has a really clustering effect of people's opinions. And it can be difficult for people who disagree to speak out. The incentive is to kind of go with the herd on social media. And it also creates your own...
Let me suggest this, and this is an original thought, relatively, that people just don't want to be seen to be supporting a panto villain like Vladimir Putin, and therefore you have to align yourself with the Ukrainians.
Yeah, and there's a lot of bad faith actors on social media where if you express a level of nuance, I mean, I don't know, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on foreign policy, but it was certainly true with lockdown. I noticed this a lot, that there would be bad faith actors. So, I was quite critical of lockdown, and some people were, the kind of abuse that I got was never, I disagree with you. I think you've looked at the evidence and come to another decision. It was, you want to kill people. You don't care about human life. It was the absolute worst possible interpretation.
You're not just wrong, you're bad.
Yes.
That's the change.
You want to kill people.
Very much indeed. Coming up, the very latest on Prince Andrew, settling his child trafficking case. That was the big breaking story this time yesterday, wasn't it? And we'll speak again to the royal biographer, Angela Levin. Now she's had time to pause for thought. But first, a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern. Risk of some very severe weather hitting the UK during the next 48 hours as storms Dudley and Eunice arrive. Widespread disruption, with Eunice being the more powerful storm, the risk of dangerous wind speeds by Friday. Wednesday night brings, wind gusts of 70, perhaps even 80 mile per hour to central southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, as Storm Dudley blows through. Widespread gales for northern and central parts of the UK, especially around coasts and hills. Then the winds moderate through the rest of the night so that by dawn, it is less severe out there, but still a blustery start to the day. Some sunny spells first thing, but further showers, falling as snow above 200 metres for northern England, much of Scotland, Northern Ireland as well. Those showers continue throughout much of Thursday, gradually easing later. A few more showers arriving into Wales, the southwest, by the afternoon. But away from the showers, there will be some brighter spells and the wind less strong by the afternoon. 10 or 11 in the south, 5 or 6 further north, feeling cold, especially where we've got that brisk wind continuing in the far north, northwest. The winds ease on Thursday evening. If you're heading to bed thinking the winds aren't particularly strong on Thursday evening, well, be aware that Eunice is developing rapidly and the winds will really ramp up by the early hours of Friday, with the risk of widespread gales and some dangerous wind speeds by the start of Friday. So initially relatively calm on Thursday evening. Then the rain arrives ahead of Eunice, bumping into cold air, turning to snow across much of northern England, central and southern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well. But the wind is of greatest concern, especially during Friday morning, with the risk widely of 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts. In places, 80 mile per hour wind gusts across central and southern parts of the UK, and around the coasts of Wales and southwest England, the risk of 90 mile per hour wind gusts, or even slightly more in some of the more exposed spots. These are dangerous wind speeds, widespread disruption and damage possible, and disruption from snow further north as well.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up.
I hug everyone we learn from it and try and move on. That's it.
Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask. So why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Well, as we told you at length yesterday evening, Prince Andrew has settled a civil sexual assault case brought against him in the United States by accuser Virginia Giuffre. Giuffre had been suing the Duke of York, claiming he sexually assaulted her on 3 occasions when she was 17, accusations Prince Andrew has always denied. Well, the Duke of York agreed to pay an undisclosed sum as part of the settlement. Some people have been printing a figure today, which I don't think we'll repeat, as part of the settlement, and accepted Ms Giuffre had suffered as a victim of abuse. No admission of liability. The Queen will allegedly help pay for the, well, here comes that number, for the £12 million settlement. There you go, £12 million. The royal biographer Angela Levin was joining us through the computer yesterday, but is now here in person, I'm delighted to say. Thanks for coming in. The dust has settled for 24 hours.
Yes.
Where are we now?
Well, I have changed my mind a bit. I found that the benign comments that he makes, you know, he didn't want to upset her, and you know, he never wanted anything was wrong, and he wants to help all these women who've perhaps been abused. I thought it sounded very phony, really. I don't know how somebody can just completely change their mind when just a few weeks ago he'd never seen her, didn't know, and you know, was quite rude about her. And I think that it's really not the words, is it? It's what you do that actually counts in that. There's no point just anybody can say anything and not mean it and carry on. I'm not saying he will carry on how he was, but it's just, it's not substantial enough for me.
The inconsistencies between what he said before and what was in the statement were gigantic. We can certainly say that, can't we?
And the other thing that I really changed my mind about was that we mentioned yesterday that there was no blocking of her talking about it and doing a book if necessary. But I learned overnight, really, that she's not allowed to talk until after the Jubilee. And I thought that that was quite a difficult one. And it means, really, that if she wants to do that afterwards, that we're going to be left with all sorts of things for a long time to come. It might very easily go into next year. And so I don't see how the royal family can relax. In a way, it's more difficult for them because she must be quite intimate about it, I expect, because of the subject matter.
Madeline Grant, I was very busy, you know, for 2 hours yesterday, so I'm tired. So you need to help me with a question or two here for Angela. We were during the commercial break. We were saying, actually, what happens to that Duke of York title? I mean, you thought maybe that Parliament plays a role.
I read that it was not something the Queen can strip unilaterally. It has to go through Parliament if they wish to do that. And there is more pressure. The MP for York, Rachel Maskell, I think, has been quite vocal on this. And it's one of those issues where, I don't know, I think now that now that this payoff has happened, there's a great appetite to make sure that that it doesn't die down, and people need a cause. And I think it will latch itself onto this, which I can well understand.
The people of York may
hasn't
feel
happened,
offended.
though, has it? It hasn't happened yet because he hasn't paid over the money.
Oh, right.
He's got a month to pay, and he hasn't yet sold his chalet. There's been a lot of comments that it's almost there now, it's almost sold. And we know that it takes a long time to sell any property, but it hasn't been sold yet. And if it doesn't sell by the date, the month, within the month, then there could still be a court case. So it's not clear, it's not stable at all.
No, and as you said, as you put it earlier, it's one of these. It looks likely to kind of overshadow certainly the Jubilee, because there's that feeling that as soon as that period of grace is over, then there could be new revelations coming out and potentially more scandal for the royal family.
But I'm going to make a really silly point. But if you live in, Madeline, you mentioned the MP from York, but if you are living in York, and we live in a world where Google searches, dictate quite a lot of what we do in life, and suddenly the word that four-letter word York pulls up alleged paedophile. You're not happy, are you? You're not happy about Andrew being the Duke of York.
No, it just keeps reminding you, and you go back to all the things. It's been going on since 2011, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
So it's almost part of what we do and what we know. It's far too long.
And just one final thought, Angela. We talked yesterday about the prospects of him in any way being restored to public life.
Zero, no. I mean, Prince Charles has already said he's got to make himself invisible, and he won't have any chance to do that. I don't think any charities would want him on their letterhead, a name on their letterhead, or to come and do anything. If he wants to work in a charity, I think it'd be quite hard for him to find one.
Will he move abroad?
I don't think so, no. I think he'll stay in the UK. I mean, his children, his daughters are here, aren't they, and his grandchildren. And Fergie's here. I think he'll probably stay here.
Okay.
Unless he finds a good golf club.
Oh,
one that hasn't barred him.
Yeah, one that hasn't barred him. On that note, Angela, thanks so much for coming in. Thanks very much. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the diversity chief taking to Twitter to criticise the Prime Minister. Wait till you hear what she earns and who she works for. First, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top stories. From April, children between the ages of 5 and 11 years old in England will be offered a COVID-19 vaccination. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, made the decision following guidance from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. The jabs will also be available for that age group in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has confirmed Britain will double the size of its forces in Estonia as part of the NATO deployment to Eastern Europe. That comes after NATO tasked its commanders to work out details to send forces amid fears of Russia invading Ukraine. NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says the alliance has seen no signs that support Russia's claims that it is pulling troops back from the border. Police searching for a sex offender who escaped from an open prison in Lincolnshire 3 days ago have released a new image of him. It shows Paul Robson without his distinctive braided beard. Officers also say his facial hair could be lighter in colour. The 56-year-old, described as a particular danger to women and children, was sentenced to life for attempted rape and indecent assault. The Prince of Wales's charity foundation is being investigated by the Metropolitan Police over allegations of cash for honours. In a statement, they said it relates to media reports claiming offers of help were made to secure honours and citizenship for a Saudi national. Prince Charles's team have stated publicly that he was not aware of any links between donations to the foundation and honours. And a swimmer in Sydney has been killed by a shark. It's the first fatal shark attack in the city since 1963. Witnesses say it was a 15-foot great white. Astronomers have discovered a supermassive black hole hiding in a ring of cosmic dust. And they've released an artist's impression of images taken by the European Southern Observatory's new Very Large Telescope. Scientists say it's helped give them a new insight into the history of our Milky Way. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Colin Brazier's back after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very warm welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. A question. What do you care about most when travelling by rail, if you do, to work in the morning, the train being on time, ticket prices hitting new highs, or the fact the network is open, diverse and inclusive, however that is to be defined? I think most would put punctuality above politics, but the UK's top paid public sector diversity chief is employed by Network Rail on £164,999, considerably more than the Prime Minister, to do the latter job. In an interview with Women in Rail, diversity boss Lorraine Martin said her job includes making sure, quote, people get a fair chance at job opportunities and promotions and seeing to it that they are, quote, treated well and encouraged to perform at their best. The public body worker is also quite vocal online. According to the Guido Fawkes website, she's been using Twitter to attack the Conservative Party, in addition, and accuse Boris Johnson of, quote, white privilege. One retweet is on screen, or should be on screen now, and apologies if you're listening on radio. We can't show it to you, never mind. It does raise questions about what agendas taxpayers' money are being used to get behind. Madeline Grant, alongside me in the studio, writes for The Telegraph, has a column there, and can ponder on this one for us. We're picking on one individual, which is slightly unfair, but we're doing it to illustrate a wider point, which is that taxpayers' money is being ploughed into diversity schemes, whether that is Stonewall or any other number of very highly paid people who are in charge of diversity. And we come back to that problem we were trying to address earlier in relation to Ryanair and its tweets, that idea of big corporations having a democratic deficit. If you're Network Rail and there's your diversity chief playing by a certain rule book, advancing a certain agenda, is she bothering really to ask democratically what the people who work for her actually think and believe? Do they believe in inclusive language? She might. Do they?
I suspect a lot of them wouldn't, and I also suspect that a lot of them who probably work very long hours for much less than that extraordinary salary that you command. I mean, it's nice work if you can get it, isn't it? I mean, that's the £1,000 is kind of, it's sort of like the kind of sum of money that people in a normal industry would have to make huge sacrifices, never see their kids, work all hours God sent, and even then be very lucky to command. And it feels that, you know, the sort of the work that is wrapped up in this job, it's just, I mean, it's an extraordinary kind of grift, isn't it? For all the talk about all the talk of white privilege. I mean, what is being paid that much money for doing very little? What is that if not an extraordinary form of privilege?
I was invited, I'll put it no stronger than that, I was invited to attend an unconscious bias provided by my last employer course. And I've never heard such guff in all my life. And at the end, the person putting on the course said, "Do you have any questions?" I only had one question, and I was too frit to put the question because at the end of the day, you don't want to rock the boat, you don't want to get fired for your face not fitting. But my question was going to be, how much do you charge for this? But I didn't put it. But it's an industry.
It is an industry, and if you work for a company that you know does this sort of thing, puts this sort of thing on for their employees, then you, the one who's actually doing the work, is paying for it. And in the case of Network Rail, the taxpayer is paying for this.
Yeah, it's still the taxpayers, because sometimes we get this sort of strange grey area between that which is nationalised.
Yes, but
Quangos,
Network Rail, I think, is national. That is the government wing, I believe. So that bit, I think, would be paid for with taxpayer cash. And I don't know, it seems to be a self-perpetuating industry, because there is an incentive for it to continue as long as possible, even as the UK does become more progressive and more egalitarian in measurable ways. That industry doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It just seems to get bigger and bigger every year, which suggests that there's a self-fulfilling element to it.
Yeah. Madeleine, for now, I know you'll come back in a little later on, but for now on that one, thanks a lot. Well, we've heard a lot recently about schools being accused of indoctrinating pupils and breaching the trust of parents as a result. Last week, a school in Nottinghamshire was accused of peddling left-wing politics to 10-year-olds. This week, we heard about another primary in Lancashire, which had banned all meat from the menu, including from packed lunches. Parents weren't given a choice. Some parents refused to go along with woke policies. Take Sally and Nigel Rowe. They are not, they are, I should say, homeschooling their boys after they were told their 6-year-old might be deemed transphobic if he questioned another pupil wearing a dress. They're not stopping at homeschooling. They're also seeking a judicial review, which they hope can help other parents avoid similar confrontations. Well, Sally and Nigel Rowe join me now, I think from the Isle of Wight. Nigel, Sally, welcome both. Thanks ever so much for your time, as ever. You are, in fact, on the Isle of Wight. Thank you. Sally, let's start with you. Ladies first. Why do you feel so strongly about this, and how did we get here?
I know, but that's a very good question. How did we get here? It seems extraordinary that we're having to even question this. But it seems that this has been peddled up and down the country, that these gender-affirming guidelines are being promoted in schools all over the country. And we're seeing a massive escalation in referrals to the gender clinic, 3,000% in a decade. So we see this as very, very important. And as it affected 2 of our children, we felt we should make a stand about this. This is a very important issue, a safeguarding issue for children.
What was the point of conflict with the school specifically? What were they wanting to happen that you were not prepared to permit?
The main issue was the letter from the school. I mean, one of the things it says, and even the belief that transgenderism may not be the best thing for a child was deemed transphobic. Also in the letter was mentioned that, you know, that if another child wouldn't recognise the child that was transitioning as a real boy or girl, that would be deemed transphobic, and the parents too would also be deemed transphobic. I mean, crumbs. I mean, how can we have this sort of stuff being peddled in schools? It's a political ideology, and really, for 6-year-old children, it can't be right.
Sally, would it make any difference if your son hadn't been 6, he'd been 12 or 14?
That's a very good question. I think particularly that young at 6, they cannot make a decision of that magnitude. I think at 12 you can have a better conversation with them. With 6, we were like, how do you even begin to talk about this? But I think, as we've already said, this is becoming an issue for children. That there's a massive increase in children who are really confused about their identity, and whether that's 12 or 5 or 6. This is concerning, really. As children, they don't have that capacity to make decisions, and I think a lot of them don't realise the consequences of affirming in a gender, because from the evidence, if you keep affirming a child in the preferred gender they would like to switch to, then it does lead to a road of puberty blockers and medication and cross-sex hormones, which can cause sterilisation. So these are serious issues that need really to be looked at seriously by the government.
Nigel, we debate this a lot on this news channel. It's debated a lot elsewhere, isn't it? But there is another side to the argument, obviously. Sally making the point about some of the effects and impacts that we see. Well, the trans campaigners say, if you don't let that transition begin, you're storing up problems for the future that will relate to mental health, and they sometimes invoke the spectre of suicide. What do you say to those campaigners?
Nonsense. We submitted a 500-page report to the judge with expert evidence from endocrinologists and psychologists, from the US and from the UK, and the evidence is overwhelming that peddling this kind of ideology is very, very dangerous. Yes, of course, we understand that there are children that suffer from gender confusion, but when you sort of put it into the school environment and you start teaching that gender and sex are two different things, and that boys can become girls, girls can become boys, is simply not true. It's not even scientific. Medically, we know. We study at school biology, don't we? And that we have, in the human genome, we have XX and we have XY. We have male and we have female. Of course, there are some issues where children are born with physical complications. But in general, we know biologically we have male and we have female. And that is the truth.
Sally, I'm usually always, full of admiration for people who stand apart from the crowd and take a stand, a moral stand. But there's always a price to be, there's usually a price to be paid, isn't there? And whether that's been shunned at the school gates or some nasty emails, it's often the case that you can't stand apart from the crowd and not see some sort of repercussions. How have other parents of children at school with yours responded? What did they say? Were they supportive? Were they critical? It was a mix, I guess.
Yes, definitely a mix. And I think this is the thing, that people are so scared to speak out, that those who do support us are very quiet about it. They just don't talk about it. And we've had a mixed variety of people just blanking us, or verbally saying shame on you or things like that. So we have had a mixed bag. But I think on the whole, from parents, if we look at it in a national perspective, there are many, many parents, in fact, majority of parents that would agree with us. Whether they speak it out is another thing, but most people, I think, agree with us. And I think the tide is turning now. People are seeing that this has become like a health crisis, and that we need to seriously look at this.
It is life-changing as well, Colin, because actually, if you do put your head above the parapet, there are, I would say, actually severe consequences to that. Because your life could absolutely change in the community. You could be sort of, shunned for the rest of your life in the environment where you're living. Yeah. As committed Christians, we believe that goes with the territory. There's a story in the Bible about a guy called Jeremiah who kept warning for people to turn from their bad ways, and he had a really hard time. And I think that's what happens when you put your head above the parapet and you speak truth. People are offended and people want to attack. They get very, very angry. But I'd say, well, as a committed Christian, it comes with the territory. It comes with the territory of telling the truth. Well, we appreciate you coming on to talk about it this evening. Thanks very much indeed. Sally and Nigel Rowe joining us there from the Isle of Wight. Thanks very much indeed. Just a thought from Madeline Grant, who's been my companion this evening on the show, reflecting on that story. It's become one of those hardy perennials, hasn't it? I don't say that in any way to demean what Sally and Nigel had to say there, because it's a really important stand they're taking, they feel.
It is, and hats off to them for having the bravery to go ahead with it, because I think there were possibly they mentioned getting abuse from some other parents. I expect there are probably a lot who are privately very pleased that someone is saying it, someone is raising the issue, because to go against that that weight of sort of bien-pensant opinion is so difficult. But it strikes me that what they're doing is particularly important because the new liberality when it comes to things like gender self-ID, particularly with children, is so new. We're stepping into the unknown. It's a brand new development. We don't really know what the long-term.
It's what I say to my children when they start lecturing me about it. I say it's a profound change. Roger Scruton, the late conservative philosopher, used to say sometimes you just need to hesitate.
Yes.
Hesitate.
Yes.
That's an argument. I'm not saying it's necessarily the only one. Of course it's not, but it's certainly one argument. We'll be back to Madeline for a bit more later on. But this story now, lorry migrant crossings increased by 30% in 2021. This is according to Home Office data. The data has been obtained by the think tank Migration Watch showed that 9,000 people reached the UK by lorry last year. Takes the number of people who crossed the Channel by small boat or lorry in 2021 to, wait for it, 37,401, which is double the previous year's figure and eight times the number in 2014. Our Home Affairs and Security editor, Mark White's been looking at the numbers and he's here in the studio with us now. Mark, we focus so much, don't we, on the migrant crossings. We were doing so this evening, but these are big numbers too.
Yes, and I think it's proof, if it were needed, that although the focus has been on those who've been crossing by small boats in the English Channel, the issue of those hitching a lift in the back of lorries has never gone away. And although we're talking about 9,000 last year who were pulled out of the back of lorries, the difference between those coming across in small boats and those in the backs of lorries, if they're coming across on small boats, the vast majority, 90-odd%, are intercepted by Border Force or lifeboats in the Channel. Some make it to shore and some disappear, but the majority don't. In the back of a lorry, of course, what happens is they come across the Channel, they're in the lorry, and then they wait until that lorry pulls into a service station way up the M6 or the M1 or whichever motorway, and they may be never seen again. So you just don't really know. You don't have a proper handle on what the true number is.
In that sense, it's worse than migrant crossings in dinghies, because at least on the dinghies, people are processed a little more properly. Mark, while we've got you, can we just address the story? It was our lead story at 4 o'clock. And some people will say, why are you leading with a think tank study? Because it's important and because it feels to some people like there is a vacuum in policy making when it comes to those migrant crossings right now, that the government is asleep at the wheel. I think we can show our viewers some of the poll results from our Twitter poll, and this gives you a sense of where you're coming from on this one. This is the think tank Policy Exchange. It's saying within 48 hours people ought to be deported, having been picked up in the Channel, and they are suggesting, for reasons they elaborate on at length, those three locations: Alderney, the Channel Islands, Akrotiri and Deucalion on the island of Cyprus, but most popular of all, 3/4 of people saying 4,000 miles away, please. Well, I suppose, Mark, they would say that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it would be some food for thought, I think, for the Home Secretary. Not that she's not already aware, of course, of how popular a move it would be in the wider country to do that, to offshore those who are coming here effectively illegally into the United Kingdom. The trouble will always be, of course, that there will be huge pushback from charities, human rights organisations. There will be a battle royal in the courts. Human rights legislation will be used. It's whether the government in today's climate has the stomach for that fight. But I think in terms of a popular decision, a popular policy to the wider country, I think it would certainly be that. There wouldn't be a huge number of people out there who would disagree with that.
And just setting aside the politics and dealing with the practicalities, I'm just seeing one of our emailers, Oliver, says practically, sending thousands of people a month. And obviously there would be, we imagine over time, a deterrent effect, but in the first few months it'd still be the same numbers coming in. A month to Ascension Island will cost a fortune. Sending them to the Channel Islands would make more sense, but whatever is decided, it must be implemented, says Oliver. I mean, yes, short-term pain for long-term gain, but golly, sending thousands of people 4,000 miles in planes and then putting them up at the other end, I mean, there's a big price tag to that.
There is a big price tag, but there's an enormous price tag to what we're paying at the moment to put people up in hotels And then, of course, they are eventually put into council housing as well, which is a burden on local authorities up and down the country. So it costs whatever way you do it. Going all the way to Ascension Island, yeah, it's probably going to cost a bit more. You charter the shipping, you come to an agreement, and you do it that way.
Madeline Grant, just from the the perspective that you write columns for the Daily Telegraph, I mean, I'm guessing their inbox is filled with this topic. It's going to be pretty close to the top of the list.
Yes, definitely. I haven't checked in with our letters team today to see if they've had about this specific report, which is new, but certainly the issue of migration, channel migrants is enormous, and I think has been for a very long time. There was a period where this was happening on a grand scale, and it was barely being reported, or was being insufficiently reported by some of the major news channels. I think this might have been before GB News was even around. So people feel that not only is this a very important issue, but one that we've yet to find a workable solution for, and the politicians have neglected.
Mark, just one final thought. We were discussing, and we don't know the answer to this, I don't know whether you do. Has the Home Office arrived at a decision as to whether it's going to publish daily crossing data?
Not as yet. It was something, because there's a change in the way in which the whole channel migration crisis is being managed. It's now being managed not by Border Force but by the military. Their way of calculating is different to Border Force, so they'd have to come up with a solution. So I can't see that the government would get away with not telling us what these figures are.
Well,
it would be too much of an outcry.
We will see. Mark White, Madeline Grant, thanks both very much indeed. More news coming up. Do stay with us.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern. Risk of some very severe weather hitting the UK during the next 48 hours as storms Dudley and Eunice arrive. Widespread disruption, with Eunice being the more powerful storm, the risk of dangerous wind speeds by Friday. Wednesday night brings, wind gusts of 70, perhaps even 80 mile per hour to central southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, as Storm Dudley blows through. Widespread gales for northern and central parts of the UK, especially around coasts and hills. Then the winds moderate through the rest of the night, so that by dawn, it is less severe out there, but still a blustery start to the day. Some sunny spells first thing, but further showers, falling as snow above 200 metres for northern England, much of Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. Those showers continue throughout much of Thursday, gradually easing later. A few more showers arriving into Wales, the southwest, by the afternoon. But away from the showers, there will be some brighter spells and the wind less strong by the afternoon. 10 or 11 in the south.